Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Alexander. I'm honored to be the Chancellor here at UW Green Bay. I want to welcome everybody who's here and everybody online. We are really thrilled at UW Green Bay to be able to bring a huge array of viewpoints and speakers that come to the university to share their ideas with us. And today is no different with Maya MacGuineas being here. We're really honored to have her with us here on campus. So we want to thank you for taking the time to learn with us. It's really important for us as an institution to make sure that we are leading in how we display the ability for us to hear from all viewpoints, to consider all viewpoints, and to make sure that we're part of the causing a healthy dialogue in Northeast Wisconsin. So we're thrilled to be able to do that, and I want to thank everyone who's here, including Ryan Martin, who I'll introduce next, who will introduce our distinguished speaker. So welcome to Dean Ryan Martin.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Alexander. I want to say just a couple quick thank yous before I introduce our speaker tonight. I want to start with the political science program, especially Dr. Aaron Weinshank for his fantastic work and interest in supporting events like this. One of the things I've always loved about our political science program is the way they're willing and interested in engaging in meaningful public discourse. They consistently bring in great speakers and engage in powerful public conversations like these. So thank you very much, Aaron, and others in political science. I also want to thank the Bradley Foundation for their generous support of this series. Without that support, we wouldn't be able to have such great speakers like we have this evening. So, and with that, I want to get right to it. So, our speaker tonight is the president of the Bipartisan Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget, with areas of expertise in budget, tax, and economic policy. As a leading budget expert and political independent, she works closely with members of both parties and serves as a trusted resource on Capitol Hill. She testifies regularly before Congress and is published in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and many other outlets. She also appears regularly as a commentator on television. Please welcome Maya MacGuineas.
Thank you. I'm going to change it up if this works for people, and we'll see. But I think we could do this as much as a discussion as people are interested in doing. I'm happy to talk about the budget for like 3 days straight if people want. Can you hear me? We don't really need the mic, right?
Online.
Oh, online. Okay, so I am happy to talk about it, but I'd also really love to kind of have a bigger discussion. So maybe I'll introduce what I do, talk about it a little, talk about why I care about it so much, and then see how we want to proceed. So I had the pleasure of doing a podcast before this, just before this, and so it sort of was like, how did I even get into the world of being literally obsessed by budget deficits and by being bipartisan in Washington, D.C., where that means I'm quite politically homeless, quite homeless in general, because if you're not a part of a party, it's a very different environment. And it's certainly never anything that I thought I would do. I wanted to work on, I wanted to be a math major. I promptly flunked out of that. So I was going to be an econ and psychology double major, which I was, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I did economic research. I worked on Wall Street, which I found very not satisfying. But I read a report by the Congressional Budget Office, which if I asked everybody what their favorite government program is, I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who would say the Congressional Budget Office, but it is fabulous. They're really good. And I read a report about budget deficits and was stunned. And this was in the mid-90s when they were much smaller than they are now. But I was stunned by how it didn't explain why what we were doing, which was borrowing, I think, $203 billion a year at the time. Now we're borrowing $2 trillion a year. But I think it's $203 billion. Why that was a good thing to be doing or why it was okay. And I dug into the issue more and more, and I learned about it, and it's not okay. That's not to say that it's not okay to borrow. It is. There are many times that we should borrow. We should borrow during the Great Recession. We should borrow during COVID. We should borrow for huge long-term public investments where you're going to see a return over time. But what we shouldn't be doing is borrowing for political reasons, which is what we do, meaning there's not an economic justification for borrowing in many instances, but there's a political reason, which is it's really hard to pay for things. And our politicians of both parties would rather borrow, which means younger people, my kids, your kids, students here, are going to foot the bill for a lot of the things that we're doing today that we don't want to pay the taxes for. The more I dug into it, the more that struck me as really problematic. And I went back to graduate school and I studied this topic, learned all about it, and desperately wanted to work in a non-political environment, trying to change a system that has no constraints about how much a country can borrow, no rules for when you can, how you can, but just says politicians are able to do so as much as they want, and you can see that it's led to a fiscal deterioration. So that's one, that's how I started doing this. Two, what I do now is I run a group called the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Horrible name, nobody can remember it. The acronym is CRFBA, which is stupid, like, we're fighting, and it's like a laugh line. When somebody introduces me, it's like, oh, she runs the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and there's always, you didn't do the normal wisecrack, like, how's that going, or are you good at your job? But, I mean, it is an incredible organization that I was able to take over from the founder years ago, in that it is committed only to worrying about how to borrow in smart ways and not borrow when we shouldn't. And there's no political angle at all. I'm a diehard political independent, and this is really neat. I don't know the politics of anybody here. I don't even know, like, if Green Bay leans one way or another. You guys have to tell me this. But I have a staff of a lot of young people, but where it ranges from whoever, I don't even think like right and left makes sense anymore because Donald Trump is kind of mixed up what the Republican Party is, but to the right of Trump or the more conservative, to Trump, to the centrists, to a Sanders Warren, like we have them all in our office. And at a time where people are separating themselves into different political affiliations and alliances, I love that. It's gotten a little tenser over the years as the whole country has gotten a little bit more on edge politically, at least in Washington. I don't know if that's how it feels here. It feels very on edge. But I really, really value working in an environment of political diversity and looking at a policy issue, not with a political angle. So we do all sorts of things. Like we will score all the people who are running for president. We will look at how their policies add up and affect the national debt. Whenever somebody is doing something that is going to add to the debt, we will push against it. Not push against doing the thing, but push against borrowing. Because every time you do a policy, whether it's cutting taxes or creating a new program or funding a program that's growing automatically, like a lot of our programs in healthcare and retirement, you make a decision. Who's going to pay for it? Is it the people who are going to benefit from it? Is it other people who are going to pay for it? Is it going to be spread out across the whole population? Should we have the wealthy pay for it? Should it be a broad-based middle-class thing? Or should we do it by cutting spending, which is always a possibility, cut other programs to pay for something? Or should it be the younger kids? And time again, we come up with the decision that it should be younger kids because there is no political downside in that right now. And so we're never pushing against the policy. We're pushing against doing it by taxing the future or letting our country have a fiscal spiral instead of figuring out how to pay for something today. So our position is, one, we don't have policy positions per se. Our position is pay for it, don't borrow, unless it's a good time to be borrowing, in which case borrow, but you should probably find a reason to offset over the long term. I'm going to do two more things really quickly, and then I'm going to jump right into seeing if people would prefer to have a discussion. Especially now you've seen how I will talk about the deficit as long as possible. But I think there's other things we could go into, and relatedly, which are, it's such a political, challenging moment to do hard things. I think a lot these days about how we're going to build the ability in bipartisan ways to address things that have hard solutions. That's on the budget, but that's also on other issues. Let me just go over a couple numbers really quickly that I think are compelling, because I think we're in this moment fiscally where there's not a single piece of good news. Every single warning signal that's out there is flashing bright warning lines. So our debt as a share of GDP, which is generally the most important number to look at, it is the highest it's ever been in this country other than right after World War II. That was the only time it was higher, And we are going to surpass that number of 106% of GDP in 3 years. So we are going to break the record that was set after World War II 3 years from now during a time of prosperity. That's one. Number two, we are borrowing $2 trillion every year, and that is going to grow. We are going to borrow $22 trillion over the next decade. That number's meaningless. Who the heck knows what 22 trillion is, but it's unprecedented. And it's the highest we've ever borrowed, this 2 trillion, as a share of GDP. It's 6% of GDP. It's the highest we've ever borrowed outside of an emergency time. So again, if there's a reason to borrow because your economy is below capacity, you need to borrow. There are lots of times you should. There is not one reason to be borrowing right now. Our inflation is above the target. Our economy is going relatively strong. There's jobs problems, but GDP is strong. And everything is a problem in terms of these fiscal situations. And yet we're borrowing the most we ever have during any time other than these big emergencies. Our debt is growing faster than our economy. That's the definition of something being unsustainable. It means it will continue to squeeze things out. And interest payments, which I think are kind of the most alarming part, our interest payments just passed both Medicare and defense, and they are now the second largest item in our federal budget. We spend $1 trillion a year on interest payments. That breaks down to about $7,000 per household on average for interest payments. Not only is it the second largest, the only thing that's bigger is Social Security, it's the fastest growing item in the budget. That used to be healthcare, but interest is now faster because interest rates have gone up. If interest rates go even up 1 more percentage point above where they are right now, we'll be paying another $320 billion a year in interest payments on top of the trillion we're already paying. It will go up by $320 billion. That's more than almost every program in the federal budget. So it's like a credit card teaser rate of the worst in trillions of the worst kind. What other bad news do I have for you? Here's some really bad news. I am the least uplifting speaker there is. I depress myself each time. We have 2 major trust funds in this country, Social Security and Medicare. They will both become insolvent in 7 years. No one talks about this. Nobody talks about this. We had a presidential election where the candidates promised not to touch Social Security. But here's what happens if we don't fix Social Security. There is a default, a legal default, where when the trust fund doesn't have enough money to pay benefits, it stops. It only pays what it can afford. There will be across-the-board benefit cuts in 7 years of 24%. That is for Bill Gates, and that is for the widow who depends on the program for all of their income. It is unconscionable. We have known about this for decades. There are trustees of this program. Every year after I read that CBO report, which I couldn't put down, I picked up the Social Security trustees report and read that. That is a lot on actuarial balance, which, just as an aside, somebody once told me they were interviewing me for a television show, and then I got a photo in the mail with all these lines plummeting down, and they wrote me a letter saying, "You're highly, highly unlikable when you talk," which is mean to say to somebody. And they said, never use the word actuarial balance because it makes people very alienated. And they said, but you should show photos of your children when you're speaking. This was a long time ago. And I was like, I don't have any kids. And they like called up for a consult because they wanted my business. And they said, it's okay, you can show fake photos of your kids, but it will make you more likable. So that's the kind of unsolicited help I've gotten. But I did read the trustees report, and I didn't read it this year, but I've read it many, many years. But the point is there are trustees of this program, and every year they warn, we have to make changes, and the sooner we make them, the better. And we have not made them in over 2 decades, knowing full well that we are crashing towards this moment where there will be across-the-board 24% benefit cuts. Now, we can choose to make changes, and then we can avoid them, and those changes aren't easy. They're not things people like. And unfortunately, when we talk about them, the ARP and others go out and like slam somebody. How dare you talk about this, this, or this? But we're going to have to make some choices, and they better be better than their across-the-board 24% benefit cut, which will really harm people who depend on the program. But we've done nothing. So we have record levels of debt. We have record borrowing that's slated to grow. We have interest payments that are squeezing out all the other things we care about in the budget. We have two major trust funds. Medicare faces the same situation. The across-the-board cuts will be to providers, which will mean there'll be less health care available for seniors. And we're doing nothing. And the fifth thing that I'll say is we are so busy fighting about it, and we are so busy kind of promising what we'll give away. When I was saying we score the presidents what the promises that they make during a campaign will score how much their promises are. They promise to borrow for virtually every program. Because if anybody goes out and talks about what they would pay for or how their budget would add up or how they would put forth a balanced budget plan, which frankly is too aggressive for the moment, we just want something that would bring that deficit down, they get killed for it. I remember when Nikki Haley on Bloomberg said, well, we should think about raising the retirement age because life expectancies used to be early 60s and now it's in the 80s. And before the show was over, she was getting like phone banked and slammed for what frankly any policy analyst who looks at this says, of course we have to raise the retirement age. Not for current retirees, not for people who are doing back-breaking work and can't work longer, but for those of us who sit at desks and can, we certainly should, because you can't collect benefits and for a third of your life when your taxes aren't nearly enough to have supported that. So even when you talk about like one reasonable policy, you just get kneecapped for it. And the problem is it's so much easier to win with nothing than something. Okay, final thought before I turn it over to you all. Why does it even matter? And this is probably the hardest thing about all this is to convince people that it matters because it is very removed from our daily lives. And so just to kind of tick through the effects it has, deficits and debt that are too high have very negative effects on the overall economy. They push up interest rates, they push up inflation, probably most importantly, they slow down economic growth and our standard of living. We would all be making tens of thousands of dollars more in our salaries if we hadn't borrowed so much in the past for non-productive things. And so people don't miss it, but we will have our standard of living will grow more slowly, everything else equal, because of the excess of borrowing going forward. Interest rates will continue to go up. There'll be pressure on the 10-year. This will make the affordability problem, especially for young people, even harder to overcome. Makes borrowing more difficult, makes economic growth more difficult. So right now we're at the point when if you borrow, even for something that would be good for the economy, whether that's a productive tax cut or a productive investment, if you borrow for it, overall you're still likely to have negative economic growth because the negative effects of that deficit outweigh the positive effects of any other policies because our debt is so high. Number two, we already talked about this, but these interest payments. I don't care whether, like we all have different preferences for the budget. They, in my mind, are all legitimate. It's just fine to have different preferences. But if you want huge tax cuts and you want huge spending increases, interest payments are going to make both of those more difficult, right? Interest payments get the single first claim on our $1 trillion every year that is going into the federal government. So we have a smaller pie for everything else. I think really importantly, borrowing has really helped us through recent economic crises, the Great Recession, COVID, certainly. And the concern is what's called fiscal space. If we've borrowed so much when the economy is strong and times are good, and our debt is so much higher, it will be harder to borrow in the future. And it may be that during the next crisis when we try to borrow, interest rates don't stay low like they have before, which has made it much, much easier and much less painful, but they go up because of the borrowing and the less fiscal space. So what you want to do is save that for when you need it, but if you use it all, you're in trouble when the emergency hits. It used to be that I worried about this mainly for economic reasons, but I now think the national security elements are very, very significant. As the geopolitical tensions between the US and China become more apparent, and this was not a good week, everybody who should be paying attention to the role of critical minerals in all of this, the fact that we have less leverage than we understood, the fact that we are going to need to do more industrial policy, which is going to be expensive than we were doing before. And at the same time, salt typhoons, everybody know what salt typhoon is? My second favorite topic. We'll talk about that, but it's a big cyber hack that has an effect on us. But our geopolitical tensions are now much more in the forefront of awareness than they were before. That means we're vulnerable. That means it's expensive to do what we have to do. We were borrowing from China to finance part of our deficits before. They could sell treasuries. That could create huge disruptions in our treasury markets and our economy. But it is a big vulnerability to be this dependent on borrowing and not be able to do what you need to do in terms of national security with that as your first issue instead of your fiscal constraints. It's sort of like the Cold War, where if we've borrowed so much, is there a point where it's going to become a problem and affect our ability in a international competition? Last two reasons it matters. One, if you care about younger people, if you care about your kids or the next generation, it is dangerously unfair. We have a group of young people who are inheriting an incredibly uncertain world right now. They need a budget that will have flexibility to meet the challenges and opportunities that they are inheriting, many of which we have created or set the stage for. Instead, what they are getting is a budget that is overpromised towards seniors, who are getting $6 of federal spending for every one that people under 18 are getting. And we have left them with massive interest payments, and we have left them with a debt that is going to have dampen their ability to respond to any of the other things. And then last, there could very easily be a fiscal crisis. And nobody really knows what that looks like. I pitched this to the head of Netflix. Wouldn't it be fun? Do you guys remember Sliding Doors, that movie? Like 2 different paths somebody could take. Wouldn't it be fun if we made a movie about the national debt and the different paths it could go on? And as you can imagine, that is not in the works. It wasn't a good pitch. But it would be good. It would be really good to see the differences. Because what will happen if there's a crisis is you will have any number of things could set it off. But say a failed treasury auction where there just isn't the demand. And so it doesn't fail. What happens is interest rates have to go up. People have to come and buy those treasuries. But rates of the 10-year don't have to be 4%. They don't have to be 5%. They could be 6%. They could go up. And the more that rates go up, the more that if it sets off a panic, it's just like the popping of a bubble. Suddenly your rates go up and you have to borrow more to pay your interest payments. And we're not borrowing just for our interest payments. We also are turning over $10 trillion of debt, short-term debt, every year, the federal government. So we're pushing a lot of money into the treasury markets for people to borrow. And just not that many people want to come and collect and buy that, certainly not at these rates. So rates go up, you have to borrow more to pay for your higher interest payments, which pushes rates up further, which means you're in a dangerous debt cycle very fast. And it's the way you hear this quote more and more these days, but it's how did you go bankrupt? First it was very slowly, and then it was very quickly. But that's what happens. Everybody knows that it's unsustainable. We are dangerously focused on short-termism in this country, whether it's economic, fiscal, political, our eating habits, like anything. We have become a short-term society, and that is really problematic when something bursts, because if it's built on a weak foundation, like our fiscal situation is, things change very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to stop and see if we can mix things up. I'd love to know what people here think about budget deficits, or why you're here to learn about budget deficits. Is that almost a hand? Yeah. Oh, I see I'm breaking all the rules. Would you like me to be like those TV people?
So, I am not a budget person, to be honest. They make my eyes glaze over. What's up? Well, I kind of got a question, because I am much less literate about this kind of thing that I should be. And at least the vibe I'm getting from a lot of political leaders is they're generally one of 2 flavors. They're modern monetary theory people who basically argue that it doesn't matter because the deficit is just how the government removes money from circulation to keep the economy moving. And you have the deficit hawks, which know nothing but a balanced budget. We're going to cut everything right now. And obviously these 2 don't agree very well. But if I've learned anything, is that there's got to be a lot more nuance to this, and probably both get something right but a lot wrong. And I was wondering if you could explain that to someone who knows nothing about budgets like me.
Great, thank you. I will. Yeah, I think there are a lot. Well, first off, I put myself as a deficit hawk. So I align myself in the second group with the first thing you said. I am a deficit hawk, but I don't think it's all about cutting spending. So I'll make that distinction. Let me first talk about the 2 myths that I see that are out there. Modern monetary theory is on one side, and the other side is don't worry, tax cuts pay for themselves, or supply side. Everything will be fixed by that. Modern monetary theory, for those of you who don't know, and it's sort of lost a lot of its luster when we hit 9.1% inflation, because that's the downside of it. But MMT is basically the belief that don't worry, because we can just create more money. And so we don't need to worry about this, that one person's debt is another person's asset. There's no problem in this. We can just create more money. There is no constraint. The only constraint is what we can produce. It also believes that we shouldn't manage these things through the Fed with monetary policy, but rather with fiscal policy. And so, first off, I would say the Fed does a lot better job than the Treasury in deciding how to manage inflation. Just to give an example, the way the Fed manages inflation is basically moving interest rates up and down. It's a nonpartisan body that is there solely for the purpose of dealing with this, not politically mixed, an institution with a whole lot of expertise. If you were to move these decisions about policy and controlling inflation to the Treasury Department, keep in mind then the heads of it would be two parties that work together so beautifully that they shut down the entire government. Like really, it's very scary to me, the idea that you would politicize something out of the Fed. And what you'd have to do if you started to see inflation was raise taxes, which you're just not going to see a politician do on the spot. Like, no, you're not going to have Chuck Schumer or Thune like looking at the inflation data saying like, okay, we got to raise taxes. It's the benefit of having some control over the economy in that way, of making it not political, as it can be made for purely those non-political choices. But I don't think I explained that well at all, so I'm going to take another stab at it. Modern monetary theory, the risk of it is if you print too much money, if you create too much money, you will have inflation. We just saw that happen when we hit 9.1% inflation. We hit inflation for three reasons. One of them was we borrowed too much. The American Rescue Plan, which was at the end of COVID, and I could go into this, but I don't think people would necessarily want to, but we filled in more than the gap in potential GDP. We overhit it. We knew, there were a lot of us warning at the time, like, we're borrowing too much. We'd borrowed the right amount for the first 4 or 5 bills, and then this last one was overkill. And then, as luck would have it, we had supply chain shocks because of COVID, and we had an oil shock because Russia invaded Ukraine. So it was a threefer. We got inflation that was really hard. But it was one of the examples of why if you borrow too much, it makes it harder. That was the more stubborn. The other two were easier. They kind of resolved because they were temporary. But if you borrow too much and you flood too much in the economy, and you're putting more in the economy than can be produced, you'll get inflation. And that's what we had. And once you have inflation, it's very difficult to stop. The point about not borrowing too much is you don't want to debase what your purchasing power is. You don't want to make your dollar worth less through inflation. Is that explaining it? I still feel like I'm missing. It is? Okay. Okay, thank you, because I think I did 2 bad jobs on that, so that's nice. The other side of it, though, is there are people, like, there's myths galore. Because here's the thing. Nobody wants to make any hard choices anymore when it comes to budgeting. We want everything to be free. And who wouldn't? But so you've just got different political storylines of why we shouldn't have to pay for things. There's MMT, there's this is so important we shouldn't have to pay for it. Like, our job is to be the skunk at everybody's party. And back to what we do in Washington, like, everyone's always mad at us. They respect us. They know that we do tell the truth. They will grudgingly acknowledge that our numbers are good, our political bias. They always say we're mad, we're unfair to either side, but they'll sort of admit that we're really straight shooters on this and there's no political agenda. But anytime we say, well, how are you going to pay for that? They're like, oh, you're trying to kill the bill. And if we budgeted, and I should remind you all, the government shut down and we don't have a budget. And we haven't had a real budget in 9 years. We haven't passed a real budget in 9 years. We've passed continuing resolutions for 25 years because we don't put in budgets. But if you budget, the question is just like, okay, if you want to do this, if you want to create this new prescription drug program or do these new missiles for national security or cut these taxes, okay, how do you want to pay for it? Do you want to raise taxes? Do you want to cut spending? Or do you want to borrow? And the answer has always been, do you want to borrow? And my recommendation would be we should limit how much you can borrow. But so don't worry, we can print money. Bad idea for inflation. Something so important, you shouldn't have to pay for it. That's absolutely the reverse. If something's important enough to do, then it's important enough to pay for. And the final one, which is, don't worry, we can just cut taxes and we'll pay for themselves. Never have, will not. For every dollar that you cut in taxes, you generate enough economic growth, because cutting taxes does grow the economy, but not enough to offset how much money the government lost. You generally offset about 20 to 25 cents of every dollar you cut. So it still leaves a lot of borrowing. The reason I go through that is, don't believe anything that sounds too good to be true when it comes to the budget. There are political reasons that people are telling everyone, don't worry, we can do everything for free. Budgeting is it's not the same as a household budget. Like we have the ability to tax, the government's much bigger, but it's still simple enough. Like, if we want to do it, how do we want to pay for it? Budgets are about national priorities and figuring out what the trade-offs are and how you want to pay for them. And we've stopped doing that exercise. And as I sort of jump into my other concern these days, we're so deeply polarized as a country that we basically have two parties trying to promise us everything so that they can win elections instead of being good fiduciaries for the country. Like, they have very different, one of the biggest differences between Republicans and Democrats is a preference for bigger or smaller government. Okay, neither one's right or wrong. Both of them are completely legitimate, but if you want smaller government, you need to be willing to cut spending. Republicans haven't done that. They've cut taxes, but they've not really cut spending. They just cut some spending as part of the big tax cut. They cut $1.5 trillion. This is over 10 years. Do you know how much we're spending over that same time that they cut $1.5 trillion, the party of smaller government? We'll be spending $89 trillion. So the party that wants smaller government cut 1.5 out of 89. And then you have Democrats, and listen, I'm an equal opportunity basher, just keep in mind, I have to work really hard that anybody's not mad at us in DC, but who will talk about wanting all these spending programs. And not only spending programs, a lot of the spending we have is on automatic growth. Medicare, Medicaid, veterans, Social Security, all of those programs are going much faster than the economy, even if we don't add anything to them. So just spending as is growing very quickly, and we need to figure out how to pay for it. And Democrats will say, it's okay, we want to tax, millionaires and billionaires. And now it's not even millionaires because there are more millionaires, it's like just billionaires. So when it was millionaires and billionaires, the cutoff was 2%. They were only willing to tax 2% of the population. None of these things are possible. You cannot bring a smaller government down by cutting $1.5 trillion out of $89 trillion. You cannot fix our fiscal problems by raising taxes on 1 or 2% of the population. These numbers don't add up. So what I will say is, anything that promises like a really easy solution, we are at 100% of GDP, our debt. We are borrowing $2 trillion a year. This has profound effects on our economy, our national security, our intergenerational fairness, our ability to weather a crisis. There is no easy answer anymore. And just because we have a political class that is fighting with each other so much they won't talk about anything hard, it doesn't make it true. We are going to have to make these changes, or the weakening foundation of this country is going to lead to some kind of crisis one way or another. So, I don't love MMT. Oh, and my answer, and I am what did you call it, a deficit hawk? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Because I would say I am a deficit hawk, except for when we should be borrowing. But I think the big difference is sometimes people think that means slashing government, right? And we can fix it in lots of ways. We can cut spending, or we can raise taxes. I am open to both, and I'm going to tell you the truth, which is it's literally impossible to fix this without doing both. Anyone who's promising not to do one or the other is not telling the truth. We are going to have to do both. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do kind of a decent amount of both, or we're going to inflate our way out of this, or we're going to default on our debt, which means interest rates are going to soar, and we'll be so much poorer for it. But I also, as a deficit hawk, no longer even discuss balancing the budget. What used to be like 10, 20 years ago, we had plans to balance the budget. We did balance the budget. I was just down at the Clinton Library doing a talk there with Janet Yellen and Doug Holtz-Aiken, who's from the Congressional Budget Office and worked in the Republican administrations. And we did balance the budget under Clinton when he worked with some Republicans in a bipartisan way. But since then, our debt has gone up so much that it's unreasonable to think we will be able to balance the budget in any soon, like medium amount of time, like a decade. So now we're sort of talking about, let's have a fiscal goal of cutting our deficit in half. It's 6% of GDP now. If we could get it down to 3%, that would be really hard, but it would be enough to reassure markets. And it's not really doable, but it's almost doable. We'll sort of put it out there as an aspirational goal. Anything in the right direction would be good. Any bill that we have passed one bill in the past over a decade that reduced the deficit instead of grew it. Any bill that made our borrowing less instead of more would be a magnificent start at this moment. Okay, were you going to join me and we were going to...
This is on, right? Yes. All right. So we got some questions in advance here. The first is, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about the federal budget?
Probably the biggest misconception is how much waste, fraud, and abuse there is. And I'm going to make that a nuanced answer. Because one, there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. And it is in things like a healthcare delivery system and a national security procurement system that really waste a lot of money, but are really hard to fix. Because those are all industries that give jobs, a lot of jobs, and nobody thinks that what they're doing is waste, fraud, and abuse. But there's a lot of ways you could squeeze out efficiencies, but it wouldn't be simple. I mean, somebody would be doing worse off. The misconception is that it was sort of the Doge effort of like, we just need to look here and find the pennies that are under the sofa cushions. Like, we could fire a lot of people. I actually think the bureaucracy is too large at the federal government. There's a lot of jobs that are redundant and aren't necessary. I deeply, deeply object to doing it in a unkind way. I will just say that's just sort of a personal thing, being in Washington and watching the lack of respect for really incredible federal government workers has been part of the texture of the national dialogue that I can't stand. It hurts to watch people being so disrespectful of each other. But the government has too many workers for the jobs that we need. There are efficiencies that we could find there, but it's not where the significant savings are going to be. So the way that we're going to save money is looking at Social Security, Medicare, defense, and taxes, the big items. It is not magically squeezing money and just making everything run better. So on one hand, I will say there are lots of things we could do better and more efficiently, but they are the things that we care about, that there's no easy fix here. That's the biggest myth. It's sort of what we just talked about. There's no easy fix. There's no easy fix. I hate being the bearer of bad news, by the way. Like, I'm a nice, cheerful person, despite what that mean person who said don't talk about actual balance said. There's so many things I want to do. There's so many things I'm excited about. I think our federal government should and can do so many things, but we also do a ton of outdated things. We do a ton of things badly. We have $25 trillion in lost revenue over a decade due to tax breaks that nobody ever looks if they even accomplish what they're supposed to. That's a way we could reform these taxes. Like, you could increase efficiencies there, and you might nod and say, like, that seems like a good idea until I tell you what they are, and you'll be like, keep your hand off my tax breaks. I love my home mortgage interest deduction, right? Do you love your home mortgage interest deduction? But it's something that actually inflates the prices of houses and makes it more difficult for young people to buy. So there are all these different policies that I think we could change and alter, but they're political constituencies for all of them. I think I'm going to go back to my theme of this evening, which is going to be, there's no easy answer. We need to fix this. If we don't fix this, it's the frog in the boiling water. It's going to be a slow, ongoing burn to our national strength. I fear that that's going to be what happens, even though we know how to fix this. But there are no easy answers.
All right, so this one's for me. You just listed off a couple of places where we could make the difference, right? What does that look like? I mean, how do we address the things you talked about?
Well, that's really tough. those are the hardest issues. Healthcare delivery system, there are a lot of issues. There is no price sensitivity on healthcare, right? So insurance is a very tricky thing. Anyone who's studied sort of basic economics knows that the problems of moral hazard and adverse selection, or the incentives that insurances create, are problematic. That can be even, so once you're insured, you will overconsume. We need to think about the things that we insure for. We also need there to be price sensitivity. We also need there to be single prices. Like the fact that different people get different prices for things can be incredibly distorting to overall cost of healthcare. We need to align incentives, this is in healthcare, better, so that your healthiness is in the same incentive as your providers. Right now, there's not, right? There's overconsumption of a lot of things because the incentive is to give you more procedures, tests, whether it's a cover your ass thing or because you'll have money by giving MRIs. So there's a lot of things in the way our delivery system that works and the lack of price sensitivity that could and should be improved. There are also some very low-hanging fruit things because both parties, like they've been in all presidents' budgets for the past years, but it costs a different amount if you get a procedure done in one place versus another. Something called site neutral, where there's a policy that almost everybody supports in Washington, which is rare, where it just says you got to charge the same price for an MRI, whether it's in a hospital or a doctor's office. Like changing it so you get different amounts is distortive. So there's some things like that. Prescription drugs, there's still a lot that we could do. But the healthcare system's really complicated because, and we all know that most money for health is spent in the last year of life. But one, you don't know what the last year of life is. And two, I don't care if it's a member of my family, I want to spend infinity in their last year of life. And we all do. And that's a really, like trade-offs, we don't do trade-offs. Defense procurement system is brutal. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how to fix it. I'm lucky that one of my board chairs was the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, and he's really, really insightful. And we're thinking of doing a whole task force to look at this. But my fear, I'll tell you, national security is that every dollar we are able to squeeze out of the entitlement system within national security, where there's a lot of extra money, and because a lot of people retire very young and still get pensions while they have other jobs, things like that. But the procurement, where you're paying contractors for low delivery of different weapon systems, and then by the time they arrive, they're outdated. I don't know how to fix that because the world is changing faster than we can keep up, right? The drones, that we now need a gazillion drones, but at the same time, we now have new sort of GPS microwave type systems that can defend against drones. So we're going to need the next generation drones. So at the time they were built, you've moved on. So that is a scary one. It's a scary one to try to figure out in a world of growing insecurity. On taxes, that one's easy. Thank goodness. Right now, so we have, I said about 20, we have about $25 trillion over 10 years in lost revenue from taxes. The way to do that is just limit our tax breaks. If you itemize, we should limit how many you can take so that nobody is having a tax bill that is so low that it is, as Warren Buffett used to talk about, he pays less than a secretary, but that you can't have enough that it gets rid of your tax bill entirely. You'd apply that to individuals and corporations. I wrote a paper on that many years ago that it simplifies it rather than having to go over after one tax break and the next.
Excellent, thank
But
you.
the most important one to fix is Social Security.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how I would do it, but it's my choice. You can have your own choices. In fact, you can on what we have, which is called the Social Security Reformer, which is a super fun thing to do at a party. You have your friends come over, and we have these online tools. How would you fix Social Security? Actually, there was a congressman from Wisconsin, Reed Ribble. Does anybody know who Reed Ribble is? Terrific. Yes. Reed Ribble used this Social Security Reformer and came up with one of the best and most responsible Social Security bills in Congress. He was terrific. And he went around and got so many people who signed on to this. He was one of the few champions who was willing to take this whole issue on. But you got to do a little of everything on Social Security. We're going to have to slow the growth of benefits. My belief is we should do it for people who don't need the program and save it for people who do. Some people could disagree, but to me, there are a lot of people when I go out and talk who say, I don't need it. I would like to give it back to the system, or I don't think I'll need it. I'd like to give it back, but if my situation changes, then I'd like to be able to get it again. That makes sense. We have to raise the retirement age. It makes no sense to think that you can retire at age 62 and live to be, like my father's about to be, like infinity. But you can, just live easily into your 90s. We can't afford that. And we've got to lift the payroll tax cap. You only pay Social Security benefits up to a certain amount, and then you don't pay above that. That's a place where we would lift it, and then it would not be as regressive a tax. You've got to do all of those. And I would also increase benefits at the low end for people so they don't retire in poverty at the same time, because if there's space, it's nice to increase a sweetener with something too.
So I should mention Reed Ribble is actually a practitioner in residence in our political science program.
Really, the single best congressperson on Social Security. Did not know that when I said that.
Excellent, yeah. So another question from the audience. You've talked about this a little bit tonight, but this person is looking for some examples. So how often is politics involved in the budgeting process, and can you give us examples, please?
Politics dominates the budgeting process. Okay, I'm thinking about what the process should be and what happens. So in February, the president is supposed to deliver his budget to Congress. President Trump didn't do that this year. He didn't do that lots of years. Biden also didn't do that some years. He delivered what was a skinny budget, but he didn't ever deliver his full budget. So that was politics because he didn't want to lay out, if you have the big tax cut that he had, how you would achieve all his promises. Because having done the scoring and promises and price tags, they don't add up. You can't have the tax cuts of the magnitude that you are, the spending preferences on defense and ICE and other things, and a variety of other priorities, and meet a fiscal target that his Treasury Secretary has put out of 3%. No matter what kind of things you stick into it that are exaggerations, which is a very, very tried and true practice of budgeting, it just wouldn't add up. And so there was no budget. That's one. Then Congress. They also didn't do a budget. The budget committees didn't do budgets. The House, but they did one for reconciliation, which allowed them to pass tax cuts, but they didn't put forth real budgets. The reason, again, is because they don't want to show the path that their choices would go on. So we have stopped budgeting. We have stopped putting forth budgets, which if you run a company or a small nonprofit, your board would never let you do. We have stopped putting forth budgets because people don't want to be accountable to the variety of things. Every single fight is political. Every single fight is, what can I give you that will make you vote for me? Which, I mean, in some ways is democracy, right? Democracy is keeping your voters happy. But the other part of democracy is actually making the best decisions for the country. And one is certainly overpowering the second when it comes to budgeting right now. The fact that every member of Congress knows we need to fix Social Security, and few will talk about it and none have done it, that's purely political. There's not a single argument to delay on something that has to happen. The fight right now about opening the government is purely political. This is a messaging fight. This is a total messaging fight where Democrats want to talk about health care. Republicans don't want to talk about health care. Frankly, we shouldn't be talking about health care. We should be talking about the government and opening it, not with $1.5 trillion of new borrowing for health care, which is what the Democratic ask is. But when I talk to Democrats, they say, oh, we know that this is about messaging. We want to make the point about health care. And so it's keeping the government open has now moved into, this is a messaging battle. And this is just an observation of mine. I don't know if other people have noticed this, but I don't watch the television news much because it makes me upset and not in a good mood. But when I do, I try to switch back and forth between different channels. What I've noticed right now is both sides on this government shutdown, they both think they're winning. And it's because they're getting such different news that they are like not understanding the message that the other side is hearing. That's very dangerous for our country when people are only getting, and this is part of the problem with being a politician in the first place. It's like everybody just tells you, like, that's so great, Senator. Yeah, you're so smart. Oh, you should be president. Like, they're surrounded by sycophantic behavior, which makes them think that what they're doing is correct. But that's happening more broadly now, and we see that's happening to us as a public, too, that we're just listening to the news that tells us how right we are and how smart we are and how awful the other side is. But this time, they're like living in different bubbles about how the government shutdown is working, which is part of the reason it's going to be and has been prolonged already.
All right, so I think we have time for two more. First one, has Congress given the president too much power when it comes to the budget, fiscal issues, and or other issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I was on a report, former Congressman Mickey Edwards out of Princeton did a report looking at the power of the purse and the power of Congress and how it's been shifting. And this was before President Trump came into office. This has been an ongoing situation where the executive is taking more power. There have been more executive actions. It was problematic in the Biden administration when they did student debt forgiveness. You might like the policy, you might not like the policy, but it was not appropriate for it to come out of an executive action and the White House. President Trump before him had done more of that. Obama had done some of that. Like, it's been gradually creeping up with each of the past presidents. But what we're seeing right now under the Trump presidency is a big jump up in a whole lot more of executive action, executive authority, and a lot of agencies that aren't doing anything to stop it. And so he is taking Congress's power away, or, as I think I might describe it, Congress has just given up on its power. Like, if you don't pass a budget over and over, I mean, it's illegal, a lot of what's going on in things called impoundment and rescissions, that where the president is not spending money he's required to, and he is spending money he's not supposed to. Those things are illegal. So put that on the side of don't do it. That's a clear line. Right. But I also find myself so frustrated at each of the White Houses that have pushed for more power, but even more frustrated at Congress that doesn't do its job. If you're not going to pass a budget, you're not supposed to get to do anything else. And it's as though they don't even notice. They don't know when the budget deadlines come and go. So you've got a problem of basically Congress lying down in the middle of the road saying, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to deal with it. And then White House, and this one I think significantly more than we've seen before, stepping in and saying, well, I'll fill that void. And that's not how our government was set to work. And it's definitely apparent in budgeting.
All right, so last one. Is the budget deficit a problem with the potential to end American life as we know it, like the party leaders often claim?
Like the party leaders often claim?
Yes.
There is no way that America will retain its superpower status if we don't change the fiscal course. 100% we will not be able to. I think that's changing anyhow. I mentioned Salt Typhoon. Everybody go Google Salt Typhoon. You got to know about it. It's the biggest hack that's ever happened in this country. It is there. You got to Google it and you got to learn about it because it's one of the leverage points where everything shifted in terms of U.S. versus China, and that's what the big question about superpowers is, obviously. So leverage is already changing, but our fiscal situation is weakening us. I do think it's very similar to the Cold War, except we're on the losing side right now. Is weakening us tremendously. We are going to have a lot of new needs, and we are not going to be able to meet them. And we could, as an economy, we absolutely have the ability to, but we are so not used to doing anything hard. I mean, I get nervous when I go in and tell people, whether it's members of Congress or in talks, like, hey, these are the things we have to do, because I know everybody dislikes them, and I'm just like, oh, nobody wants to hear this. How do you persuade people to do hard things? We are so out of practice of making any choices, doing anything difficult, frankly, rising to the occasion. I believe we are in a massive moment of an interaction between our own polarization that is leaving us so divided, distracted, and distrustful. We are missing the entire ballgame, which is both what's going on in AI. It's a little late in the discussion to bring up AI, but there's a lot of great things that AI is going to do. There's a lot of incredibly dangerous things that AI is going to do. We are not paying enough attention to the dark underbelly and trying to prepare for that. And there is an interplay between that and the weaponization of these new technologies and what our adversaries can do to us. And that is happening, and we are so busy fighting that we are not noticing it. And I do think that the fiscal health of this country would be necessary to address those problems And we are not prepared to do that, even if we look up from our fighting domestically and start to try to deal with some of the major threats that we have. I do think that the rare earth stuff that has changed the dynamic this week might get some people to wake up, but it is also too little, too late in many ways. Okay, I can't end on that note.
Nope.
Okay.
I get that.
I'm just thinking of a better note.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to just end with any final thought you had for people, whether they're here or online.
Okay, here's the final note, and we discussed this a little bit before. We actually know how to fix this, and it is not that hard. We know what the policy fixes are. There are so many people in the policy community. I went to graduate school in public policy. I loved it. There are all of these earnest policy people from the left and the right and the center, like myself, who agree on 80% of the things. There's so much that we'll look at tax policy or fixing Social Security or dealing with health care. Defense procurement, I still don't know the answer, but so much that's agreed to and that's well understood. And we know what to do. The question is whether we're going to stop fighting long enough to be willing to do what we need to do. And so that's a lot easier than we don't have any answers. You know, I've never known how to fix climate. I didn't know how to fix the Middle East. I look at all these things, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even see the solution. On this one, we kind of know the solution. We pretty much know the solution. If we put in place a fiscal commission where you had a bunch of experts who came up with recommendations and said to Congress, you get an up or down vote. They could say, well, this is terrible, and I obviously would have done so much better if you'd left it up to me, but I'm going to go ahead for the good of the country and vote for this set of recommendations. We could start even with just baby steps, doing small fixes. Let's fix Social Security first, something like that. So we know the policies. Maybe a commission could help, and we can fix this, but we have got to change the norms, the fighting, and the willingness to kind of embrace some of the hard choices that are really out there if we're going to. That's a pretty happy note.
A super happy note.
Yeah,
Thank
super happy.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here. Please, a round of applause for Maya.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. We appreciate you being here.
Nice to be with you all.